Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the launch of the book and book series, the Built Environment in Emerging Economies. We decided to introduce a new book to the field because we felt there was a need for that. There were voices, projects, approaches, ways in thinking that were not gaining prominence in the mainstream publications. The first volume in the book series is called City, Space and Power, and it's a conversation between various authors. I very much like to see it as a conversation. A lot of synergy was kind of identified as we were working on this book. And the concepts of the unheard and the marginalized and the hidden people, we all share very similar values, the authors of the book. And we also believe that cities impact whole nations and impact the world. So they have a powerful influence. And with that, I would like to then hand over to the authors.
My name is Toffa, the director of a small company called Rethink Design, where we look at research, education, and design. And I contributed a chapter called Learning to Speak. Before I can go into the detail of what it contains, I need to contextualize the substance that it deals with. Because we cannot understand the particulars without understanding the larger context. So here is a diagram of an architectural field. In other words, the kind of things that are part of our discipline, which are key dimensions that we need to focus on if we wish to transform the discipline. The most famous of all is design. Architects dearly love speaking about design, perhaps 90% of the time. But there are many other aspects that need critical attention. Theory and thinking needs attention. It is consigned to academia, and not even all academics are theorists. We need partnerships with other institutions, and we also need institutional reform. And these are almost a kind of a hierarchy. These last aspects, partnerships and institutional change and reform, are absolutely crucial, and there's almost no scholarship on these things. By institutional, I mean institutionalized, not just formal institutions, but institutionalized cultures. So architecture is not just made up of institutions, SAIA, SACAP, our architecture schools at universities, but they're also institutionalized cultures. They have a character, they have norms, they have things that typify them, right? These things, design more than anything else, is what we speak about. But it's completely partial and inadequate. We desperately need, absolutely crucially need, a scholarship on and strategies to deal with these other things. My contribution to the book deals especially with our institutionalized cultures, and there is virtually no scholarship that deals with that. So that's a context of where it fits into the bigger picture. It is one of the most neglected aspects of the entire architectural discipline, of which there is almost no scholarship. So to go into some aspects of what the chapter speaks about, learning to speak. These are just various quotes from SAIA presidents and SACAP presidents, all identifying that transformation is a big problem. And it, as one SAIA president states, let me state that transformation must cut across all our activities. As Luanda Empower states in 2019, it cannot just be confined to a SAIA transformation committee, right? There's the beginning of an understanding here that transformation is something that impacts upon many, many, many things, right? So what we need to understand, and one of the contributions that I think my contribution to the book makes, is to understand how architecture, how our discipline and how our institutions are completely enmeshed in our society. We always act and think as if we are intervening in a society out there. But all of those problems exist within here too. All the problems of class, of race, of education, of gender, all the spatial problems that are out there are inside our disciplines as well. And we need to start to learn to understand them. And we need to, and the reason we need to understand them is to be able to develop ethical and imaginative counter strategies. Because unfortunately, the nature of our discipline is that we avoid controversial topics, and so we don't understand them, and therefore we don't engage them, and therefore they reproduce themselves. Okay, so one of the key concepts within the chapter is that I introduces the idea of authorship, and this is simply to understand that we are positioned in our society. We have a class position, we have a spatial position, we have a racial position, we have a political position, we have an intellectual position. We are not robots, to state the obvious. So where we speak from in that position impacts on what we say and what we do and how we think. Now, architecture, as has been stated throughout the day, is really suffering from a critical problem of transformation. So it was formed, our discipline, during the colonial era, and it still reflects that constitution, that social makeup. Therefore, what we speak about, our concepts, what we teach, what we write, every single concept in the whole architectural profession that we engage with is authored in that context, right? In other words, all the ideas that we deal with in architecture are not authored by someone living in, say, part of the former Bantustans, where a third of our population still live, which would bring a completely different experience, a completely different set of terms of references and priorities, right? So what many people today have pointed out is the statistics of the lack of transformation. But what we have failed to understand are the implications of those statistics, the implications of that data. It affects our entire discipline, all our knowledge, all our concepts, all our institutions. The culture is all drastically affected by this. This is what I call authorship. It is to say that what we speak is affected by who we're speaking. Therefore, we need to have transformation, not just for statistical reasons or representation by numbers, but it will actually affect the very substance of our discipline. Okay, and not to go into too many detail, but all our publications are affected by this. One of the most significant publications that came out recently is 10 Years, 100 Buildings. We all know it. It has had a subsequent one on students. But what people don't realize about this is that our scholarship reflects the lack of transformation, the dire straits we are in. So only 8% of 37 writers here were not white. Okay, and of the 115 built projects in this book, only 6% of those 115 built projects was by an architect who was not white. Those are radical distortions, and it's the norm in our discipline. So what I'm pointing to is that the implications of the lack of transformation. Okay, they affect our scholarship, they affect our teaching, they affect our institutions. And then to finally to end off. 2 points that were raised today that I just want to speak to was one of the points was around the difference between data and value. I think Mokena raised that especially, that many of the presenters were presenting statistics, data, graphs, hard science, hard quantifiable things. And they were not really engaging with the implications of that data. you know, the qualitative dimensions of that data. And one of the reasons that so many people cannot do that is because we have never learned how to do that. We need to, the title of my chapter, we need to learn how to speak. We need to learn how these problems of the lack of transformation actually affect our culture, our values, our discourse, our education, etc., etc., etc. We haven't yet begun to do that. And the final point I will make is the keynote by Prof. Joe Noguera, one of my old teachers, is the importance of ethics. And I would add to that that ethics cannot only engage with the world out there, but it has to deal with our discipline. How the everyday realities, not just out there, but the everyday realities and structures within our discipline. It is both without and within. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there.
And where you see this going forward?
I mean, I think there's all the scholars involved are dealing with very complex questions, and their analysis is very deep. And the problem with that is that it needs to become mainstream, and within the design disciplines or the spatial disciplines, there's a tendency to fall back onto default modes of thinking and default modes of working that are not adequate to actually deal with the challenges that we're speaking about. So the problem is in education, we need to teach differently, and we need to think differently, and we need to speak differently. It is actually a monumental challenge. So we need to produce new kinds of thinkers. We need to produce new kinds of writers. Education is absolutely implicated. Our institutions, which are, shall we call them the gatekeepers, really need to also understand and not be separate from these kinds of issues. And then finally, we need collaboration. We need interdisciplinarity, as Ricardo was saying, but we need to partner with other organizations, with other kinds of groups dealing with similar issues. And it's only once you have a critical mass of practitioners and thinkers, and once you have an education system that is producing the kind of intellectuals that can actually engage with these kinds of issues, because architecture, at least in South Africa, does not produce intellectuals. We are also always going to be trying to catch up ground, and we're also always going to have a society that we can't grasp. We are speaking from a distance.
Christina, over to you for questions for Tariq and Amira.
Thank you, Gareth. Thanks, Tariq and Amira, for your excellent work. Me, as a researcher and urban planner from the global north, acting in the global south, I was very pleased to receive the book and, of course, to receive this invitation to interact with you. I feel it's very necessary to have much more literature produced from you. You have so much to say for us to listen and to learn, because I feel that the theories that I've received from the Eurocentric tradition, planning tradition, has not satisfied my own orientation. And I can understand that, in my understanding, we can only move forward if new theories arise that will necessarily arise out of the rich cultural heritage of the Global South.
And we invite our closing commentary, which is from Professor Namandi Ella.
The real colony to be decolonized in the contemporary culture is capitalism. And every time we look at it, when we look at struggles like Black Lives Matter, roads must fall, fees must fall, Occupy Wall Street, democracy protests in Hong Kong, the Jasmine Revolution or the Arab Spring, and then the ousting of Omar Bashir in the Soviet Union. I can't name it, the list is inexhaustible. All these, they appear to be very different in different sectors of the world, but they are about the relationship between humanity, social relations, power structures, and the way that we are immersed into it. I would end with one thing. I think every student of architecture, every African child needs a lesson 101 on capitalism. It doesn't matter what you study in the university.